You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brook-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. In today's crazy modern world, men and women are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we created the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gifts. And the next way that you can walk that path is by joining our new crucible, Waking the Wild Heart. This is for you if you know in your heart you're ready to claim the clarity and courage from which you can make the hard choices to create a soul-led life overflowing with wild love, pleasure, expression, and purpose. We begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September, and there are only a few places left now. So if your heart is feeling this is for you, go claim your place now at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. I really hope to see you then. This week's show is with Dr. Carolyn Elliott. She has helped thousands of people dramatically change their lives for the better via her online programs and private coaching. She's done this through using applied Hermetic philosophy, ritual magic, and a cutting-edge twist on Jungian psychology. She's the author of the rising new phenomenal book, Existential Kink, Unmask Your Shadow and Embrace Your Power, and the cult favorite creativity handbook, Awaken Your Genius. In this show, we spoke about Carolyn's philosophies about money and wealth. And of course, also, I ought to mention, she made a real distinction between the two that you'll hear her kind of pick me up on when I used one word when I actually had meant to use the other. So you'll hear how she corrects me when I think I asked her about money when I meant wealth or vice versa. I can't remember, but you'll hear why she makes such a distinction between the two. And also how we can recognize the unconscious desires that are creating our lives. Ultimately being able to love the part of us that is finding pleasure in the seemingly unwanted parts of our lives. This was such an incredible show. So much so that we've already arranged a part 2 so we can dive even more deeply into some of the ideas that we explored in this show. In fact, on that note, if you have questions you would like me to ask her in that part 2, do let me know. You can either post them in the Facebook group or drop me an email at leanne@primalhappiness.co. And now let's jump in. Hello, Carolyn. A huge welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Leanne. Wonderful to be here.
I am so excited. I was already feeling like, oh my goodness, we have like so much rich, juicy material to get into. And then I asked you one question and your answer was just like, right, let's do that. Let's do that. Yes, I'm really excited about this conversation. In fact, I suspect we've got more than one show in us actually. Mm-hmm. So yes, I feel like this could be the first of at least one more. So wealth is the kind of main topic we're going to talk about. And I'm going to ask you the question I just asked you, which is to share your philosophy about wealth, because that alone was just like, oh my goodness, that is so yummy. So would you?
Well, yeah, my philosophy. Okay, so a little splitting hairs, because you asked me my philosophy about money. My philosophy about wealth is actually a whole bigger
Oh my goodness.
I'll tell you about my philosophy about money, and then we can tie it into my philosophy about wealth in general.
Cool. Yeah, good spot. But yes, so tell me about your philosophy about money. And
okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm making these fine distinctions here because money I regard as a kind of catalytic substance. So, like sex, like an entheogenic medicine, it can be used to expand consciousness, to create, big, beautiful shifts. And if handled unwisely, can also be something that takes us into addiction, suffering, ignorance, compulsion. Just like, people can get addicted to sex, or people can, abuse entheogenic substances. The same sort of dangers are in connection with money, and the same sort of big possibilities. So that's my little philosophy of money.
Wonderful. So I'm just as thrilled to hear that the second time round. And something has just come up for me as a question. Was thinking, the two other substances that you mentioned are kind of natural, primal, of the earth, whereas money, through the lens that we typically see money, isn't. So I'm interested to know how you see that. Like, why would that fit? How are you placing money in that same category as sex, as entheogenic medicines? How do you see that would fit or could fit?
Brilliant, wonderful question. Yes, so exactly. So entheogenic medicines, sex, things that are kind of built into life on Earth. Money, a sort of new, fairly recent human invention, right? It's happened in the past few thousand years. I would say specifically that money is the medicine and poison of civilization. So we don't have it. Okay, to get into a little bit about the history of money, it's not possible to have money as we understand it in our modern context unless civilization already has technologies of writing and technologies of sort of understanding like mathematical units. So money as we know it kind of came into being in ancient Greece a few thousand years ago, when the Greeks, who had a sense of dividing everything into equal little units of measure, encountered the knowledge about how to write from Sumerian, Babylonian cultures. Because what money actually is, and I'm taking the time to explain this because it was strange to me when I first learned it. And so I think that a lot of us don't kind of carry around this awareness already, even though money is such a common everyday thing. You think that we would. But anyways, money is always a debt. It's always a representation of debt. And it always involves at least three parties. So, Leanne, if I give you 30 chickens, and you've received 30 chickens from me, and in essence, then you have sort of this debt to me. Let's say we're in our little Greek village and you owe me 30 chickens, okay? But I kind of know that you might not be able to pay it immediately, and that's okay, that's cool. But I'm just going to write down a little note. Leanne owes me 30 chickens. And then let's say I have another friend who wants to buy that debt from me, who wants to take that over so that you can owe them instead. So then we work out that transaction, and then that person has the slip of paper that's like an IOU note. So instead of owing me, it's not like a one-to-one trading relationship anymore. There's a third person involved, and they have this slip of paper that's worth 30 chickens from Leanne. And as these sort of slips of paper, these records, which they don't have to be slips of paper, what you really need for money is a ledger of debts and transactions, which is what like modern blockchain Bitcoin is all about, having these distributed ledgers that record, what's been exchanged where, who owes what.
And what
so money is sort of like this vast ledger system of debts, and you have to have writing in order to do it. So there's this inherently linguistic component to it. It's a form of language. It's a form of meaning. And its meaning is always something about energy, being owed or energy being given. It always has this like push and pull and this like power dimension to it. And it also has this quality of being very connected to the past and the future in a way that I'm not even sure that humans, until we invented money, had the same kind of awareness of the past and the future, of things owed and things that I'm going to, how I'm going. So, sorry, I'm getting badly, but it's exciting.
No, I'm finding this is fabulous. I'm joining so many dots I hadn't seen before. So carry on. I'm loving this.
Right. Well, so if I'm remembering correctly from my grad school days, it was Friedrich Nietzsche On the Genealogy of Morals wrote about how perhaps humans had no consciousness of the past and future until debt became a thing, because you're just hanging out, doing whatever, enjoying the seasons, life is happening. But all of a sudden you owe UGG something. And if you don't pay up, UGG is going to beat you. And you get beaten a few times by UGG, and then you start to like, wow, I really need to keep track of what's going on here so UGG doesn't come beat me again. I mean, so there's violence built into it. There's power dynamics built into it. It doesn't have to be necessarily violent. Like, it could just be a flow and exchange amongst people. But there is this sense of a coming to consciousness through an awareness of social relationships where things are owed, and if they're not paid, then somebody might come to collect and it might hurt. And so we better become more aware of the past and the future and how we're organizing everything. So
can I just jump in with something? I'd never considered any of this before in the way that you're talking about it. It occurred to me as you were just talking about it that there is, in an Indigenous setting, there would be a consideration of past and future in terms of natural cycles, like you're saying, like seasons, menstrual cycle, moon cycle. But living in such, like, even connection isn't quite the right word, but like such absorption in the cycle, which is a natural cycle, I think is quite different to what you're describing, which is almost like a pattern, a cycle that we've then created because it's the only way to make sense of it. And that's fascinating, isn't it? Like, I completely see what you mean. It requires this new relationship to past and future that isn't a natural one that we've just are part of. It's like something that sits outside of ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of one way of thinking of it is like, because not to say that people in pre-money cultures have no awareness of time. Obviously, there's a lot of awareness of time, but exactly like you're saying, it's sort of a more intimate awareness. And this kind of awareness that we're talking about is a bit more alienated. It requires a kind of ability to separate out, and that is not quite the same.
Yeah.
So, yes. And it's also very, very interesting to think about that before money became a thing, mostly cultures operated in terms of gift exchange. So at a smaller tribal level, that's usually quite beautiful, very idyllic. We could, easily imagine a small society of a few hundred people that's just all working together and such the like. At a larger scale, at a larger population density, gift societies actually get kind of gruesome, because the only way for resources to be exchanged is, well, there's a few different ways. There's direct trading. There's seizure, like violent seizure, like just coming and taking over somebody's castle or somebody's fortress. Or there's marriage. So feudal gift societies tend to be very, they sort of reinscribe class distinctions over and over again in this way that can be very conservative and very stifling, and doesn't really allow much room for people to use their creativity to come up in the world. It's like either you get married, either you seize somebody else's stuff violently, those are basically your options for getting rich in that kind of society. And that's what was happening in ancient Greece before the invention of money. So something that I think is fascinating is when money came into invention in ancient Greece, it was seen as this scandalous, transgressive, disgusting, dangerous thing that was going to allow all of these dirty, poor people to just, by the strength of their wits and creativity, suddenly have things to exchange, and they're going to be able to get power, and they're going to be able to, we're going to have to reckon with them. And it was so Hermes was the god associated with money in ancient Greece, and Hermes is the god of meaning, the god of consciousness, the god of magic. I mean, as we talked about, money is a form of language and it's a form of magic. It's this like fun, weird little sleight of hand of who owes who. And Hermes, because the upper classes hated the invention of money so much and hated the social fluidity that it brought with it, and the ability for much more exchange to happen, much more movement, they started all of these stories about how Hermes is a liar and a thief and all of this fascinating stuff. He became the god of liars and thieves and merchants and travelers. And anyways, I consider that interesting because I'm involved in Hermetic magic work, which is sort of all about the dance of meaning.
Wow. Goodness me. So I feel like so many different directions we could go in from here. In fact, I feel like now I want to know your philosophy of wealth. It feels like that's quite timely.
Oh, yes. So thank you. Yeah. So I do want to say real quick for the listeners at home, if they're interested in this sort of story that I'm spinning about money, there's a great book by a guy named Felix Martin called Money, the Unauthorized Biography. And that's a historical resource that I would point people to. So my philosophy of wealth, well, so obviously I love money, and I think that money is a great, I want lots of it. I want everybody to have lots of it. I want it to flow beautifully. It's a wonderful part of wealth. And I think we all know people who have tons of money who are completely miserable. And that's not what any of us would call real wealth, right? So what I find interesting about the word wealth is if we look at it etymologically, and I hope my memory is going to serve, I might get this a little mixed up, but I think this is right. The word comes into English from German. I think it's the German word wheel, which means will. And then that came into English, and it started to be connected with this notion of well-being. So somebody who had a powerful will was able to create well-being for themselves. And then well-being became synonymous with wealth because obviously, if you're so destitute, you're lying in a ditch, you're not really enjoying well-being. But if you have, you're prosperous, you're flourishing, there's a kind of a well-being there. So I see my notion of wealth is connected with having a powerful will, a will that lets me create beautiful, bountiful things in the world for myself and others. And as we mentioned earlier, it's possible to be in such a relationship with money that your will is destroyed by it. Like we see this sometimes when people win the lottery or people who inherit a lot of money, and they're like, oh, well, they don't know what to do with it. It overwhelms them. And pretty soon either they spend it all or they get into drugs or they get into, other bad scenes because money is only really worthwhile if we have a strong enough will, an integrated enough will to be able to wield it as the tool and the catalyst that it is. Likewise, with sex, likewise with entheogenic substances like mushrooms or ayahuasca or cannabis. So then the question comes up of how do we create a really deep, unified will? And this is a fascinating question to me, and this is what a lot of my existential kink work has to do with, because most of us human beings are walking around with just terribly, terribly divided wills. We're always saying that we want one thing and then we're doing another. It's like the most common condition. It's very human, very understandable. And it's also, something that we kind of need to learn to work with if we want to experience really exponentially gorgeous results in our lives.
Love that. So if I can just recap what I've heard so far and then sort of dive into that, creating that wheel. So energy itself is, as you were saying, like similar to sex, like a thing, an energy that isn't kind of good, bad. It's just a powerful catalytic energy. And then wealth is your relationship to it through this lens of how much will you've got or how integrated your will is in relationship to money.
Precisely. Beautiful. Yeah, you summed it up so well. Yes. In relationship to money and in relationship to everything, in relationship to all the things. All the things. That's where our I like to think that's where our wealth, our well-being comes from, is all of those different relationships and how harmonized they are. So
would you say, can I just ask you this before we dive in? Would you say typically with these like really powerful energetics like money, like sex, would you see that there would typically, your relationship to one would have a kind of like for like sort of halo effect on another one of those types of energies?
Definitely, they can be super intertwined, especially money and love, money and sex. So it's interesting because I see a wide kind of variation in people. So I like to talk about havingness levels, which is similar to what the psychologist Gay Hendricks talks about when he talks about like having an upper limit problem. So this notion that there's like an upper limit to what we will allow ourselves to have. So sometimes I see people who, they have a really great ability to receive love. They just have tons of friends. Their family's really awesome to them. But they have no havingness level for money whatsoever. And they're always just kind of scraping by. And likewise, I met people who have a giant havingness level for money. They are able to make millions of dollars very easily. And they're really resistant to intimacy. So there's those, that exists. And then there's also, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know if there's always a direct, easy, simple correlation, although I do think that there's related, because I've also seen plenty of people who have challenges in both arenas, and the interconnection being this idea of like worthiness. So there's this common unconscious notion people carry around that they need to somehow do special backflips to be worthy of love or worthy of money. And that gets into a whole intense territory that has to be excavated. And
that makes complete sense. I've definitely seen that for sure. So kind of weaving back to just before I asked that question, you were talking about this idea of I think you used the word sort of having an integrated will when it comes to money, i.e. from that place being able to create wealth. I feel like that's a massive question, like how does one do that? But so feel free to kind of break it down a stage two. I mean, maybe it'd be useful through the lens of, maybe through the lens of that kind of havingness problem, like the common ways that you see this shows up and then how you would integrate from there.
Absolutely. So, okay. So sort of to give a little abstract overview, when talking about unifying the will, what I like first for people to understand is that we all have our conscious will or our conscious desires, basically like what the little interior monologue in your head is walking around saying that you want. And usually that interior monologue always says, I want good stuff, right? I want lots of money. I want everybody to like me. I want to look super cute in my clothes, and I want to be in amazing creative flow, right? It says, it only ever tells me that I want good stuff. Okay. Then we have another part of us, which is our unconscious desire, our unconscious will. And it's literally these desires that we are not aware of, that we would not even recognize as our own, because they seem so foreign, so alien. We're literally not conscious of them. They're like unknown desires. So, but there is a way of finding out about them. And it's a very simple way to find out what your unconscious desires are. Just look at what you've created in your life. What is happening right now in your life? That is exactly what your unconscious is interested in experiencing. And this can be a very, very offensive notion for some people. And understandably, because there's lots of pain and horror and atrocity and injustice in the world. And even aside from that, there's lots of people who are just experiencing simple frustration. Like, I don't know how to make as much money as I think that I want. I don't get as much love as I think that I want. So there's a whole lot that can be said about that, but it's essentially coming to terms with the unconscious will is like coming to terms with the divine will. So it's and the scary thing, and I learned this mostly from Byron Katie. I really, really love Byron Katie. The interesting thing is that if we try to parse out the divine from everything that's happening, we immediately become crazy, and we immediately, come up with all of these sort of strange things. But if we just really understand that everything that's happening is part of the divine will, no matter how gruesome it is, no matter how stomach churning and sad it is, if we're able to stand in the awareness that the divine includes totality, everything that we would consider good and everything that we would consider evil, we begin to be able to approach an appreciation that isn't good and isn't evil, but instead is loving. And it's centered in this kind of very, very paradoxical, very, very non-dual place that is love. So, so basically, all right. So just to to sort of back up a little bit and go for a relatively mild example from my own life. For years and years, for like the first 10 years of my adult life, I was in graduate school, and then I had finished graduate school. I'm a doctor of philosophy, of critical and cultural studies. I was really kind of broke. I mean, my stipend for grad school was like $1,500 a month. And then after that, I was doing freelance resume writing for Coca-Cola executives. And I was sort of making a few $100 a month, which was really just scraping by. And at one point, I didn't even have my own place. I was technically homeless. I was sleeping on the couches of friends who were very kind and generous to me. And I was standing in line at a food bank because I didn't have money for food after paying my student loans and my credit card bills and everything. So I was standing in line at the food bank. It was a freezing cold December morning. And I was just, wow. I was like, how did I get here? And I began to be curious because I had read all this stuff in psychology, Freud and Jung, and I was like, is there some part of me that enjoys this, that desires it? Do I have an unconscious desire for this frustration, this humiliation, this limitation? And it was just such a strange idea that I became really fascinated with it. And I began to pay really close attention to myself. And I started to notice that indeed, I did seem to get this kind of like secret thrill, even though it was so painful and so anxiety, nerve-wracking, humiliating. I could notice that there was some little tiny hidden part of me that was just having so much fun with all of this, and the scrambling every month to see if I would have enough money to pay the bills, and all of it. It was like constantly this game. And so I got to be really curious about what would happen if I just let myself fully feel that pleasure without shaming it, without fearing it, without being guilty about it. And I realized that it was analogous, and this is where the name existential kink comes from. I realized that it was analogous to, what people all around the world in bedrooms and dungeons and stuff do, which is they create these scenarios with safe words and agreements and everything, where they go ahead and they experience really intense sensations that ordinarily they wouldn't experience as pleasurable, but they give themselves a special container in which to go into those sensations and really fully receive them and surrender to them, and sometimes have even ecstatic experiences like that. And as I was observing myself and noticing like these sparks of pleasure that I had in connection with like being so broke, I was like, wow, I don't just have a bedroom kink. I have an existential kink. I get weird, twisted pleasure out of having no money and having nobody wanting to pay me and being devalued by the whole world. And I started to be, and this was really liberating for me to see, because as I saw, and as I was honest with myself that I took pleasure in it, I began to be able to see the ways that I created it, that I perpetuated it, that I made it happen, that I sought it out, the experiences of devaluation or experiences of frustration. And I began to...
Can I just jump in and ask a question? Because this is fascinating. And I just want to, before it goes on too long, there's a question I really want to ask in case I forget. And then I think it's a key one. That first point when you recognized, I do have, as much as I'm saying this is a nightmare, I've got this spark of pleasure. At the moment, I'm struggling to, it's like I understand everything you're saying. It makes complete sense to me. And yet I'm struggling at the moment to imagine identifying that spark of pleasure. Does that make sense? Because I imagine initially the whole, it is out of consciousness. It must have been quite well hidden. And so I don't know if you could just say a little bit more about how you became aware of that, or as you've worked with clients, because I'm guessing, a similar thing needs to happen for them, where they suddenly realize like, I am getting off on this as much as I thought the opposite. Would you mind just slowing down just on that piece and just like, how did you make contact with that pleasure?
Absolutely. So a few different factors were involved at the time. One, I was very involved in tantric sexual practice. So my body was charged with a lot of sexual energy. And for people who have, I've since discovered that I don't have to be actively doing those kinds of practices in order to access the energy. But certainly if people don't feel like they have any sexual or pleasure energy flowing in their body, if they feel really shut down, then it could be especially hard to access. But actually, so that can be something that really helps. Having an active sex life or an active self-pleasuring practice can be very useful in in finding the honesty about what really, really, really turns me on.
Yeah,
another thing is to just look at what your sexual fantasies are. So I've talked to very, very, very many women over the years who tell me that they have sexual fantasies that involve some element of devaluation or, kinky submission stuff. And they have challenge. And that's not a coincidence. That's a real, beautiful, honorable, wonderful desire. And it has ramifications for what it creates in experiences in other realms of life.
Outside of sex. Yes.
So I'm not saying that anybody, should not have those. I still have those, but becoming aware of them and honest about them and integrating them and celebrating them fully and not having shame about them, not having guilt about them, being like, this is a part of me and it's awesome. And every part of me deserves to be loved and honored and welcoming it. That's what lets it, creating that space and that welcome creates a sensation of fulfillment. And sort of, classic law of attraction teaching, if you feel really fulfilled, you will have an easy time having experiences, synchronicities that resonate with fulfillment. But if you're going around feeling yourself, which as I was at the time, and as I can still get into every now and again, seeing myself as just this put upon, lacking, suffering person who's being so deprived and hated by the world, and I'm never getting what I want. Instead, I start to realize, oh, I'm getting exactly what I want. And what I want, my ego thinks that it's totally messed up and disgusting and horrible. And I can find a way to give it my total approval and just love it, because there's nothing has ever been shamed out of existence. Things are only ever healed with love. They're not healed.
Oh, yes.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Can I just quickly jump in? I love everything you said there. It's just so yummy. A couple of things came to mind. I love the connection you made with fantasy, and a Jung quote, which I'm sure you'll know, which I must be my most quoted quote, which is something along the lines of, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life, and call it fate. And I was just like,
that's my favorite quote, Leanne, of all time, of anybody.
It serves so many purposes. But I was just like, wow, until we see that, it is just going to spill out into our whole life, into areas we don't want it to spill out into. And we'll go, oh, look, it's become my life. That was fate. When actually, had we just been able to see like, oh, I really get off on this, and actually been able to like allow the space for that and honor it in a place where it's actually going to like fit much better. For example, in my sex life, like, oh my goodness, it makes so much sense.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
I love that. I love that.
Yes, you get it completely. And that was exactly the quote that I was pondering that day in line at the food bank. I was like, until you make the unconscious conscious, because I was like, here's my terrible fate. I'm broke all the time. It's embarrassing. And I was like, what if I have an unconscious pleasure in this? And that was something that the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, whose writing is very difficult to read, but he had this very interesting idea that there's something called jouissance. And that jouissance is the sort of pleasure that's so big and so unbearable and so socially taboo that it becomes unconscious. And from there shapes our fate in connection with, like what Carl Jung said. There's another side note for friends, listeners. There's a book by Eric Wargo called Time Loops. And it's an interesting consideration of jouissance and also precognition and all sorts of strange things with space and time. I'll just throw that out there. But yeah, so this huge pleasure. So part of what I do when I set aside time, so my book Existential Kink describes something called the Existential Kink meditation, which is just setting aside like 15 minutes to just feel into the sensations in my body in connection with whatever don't like situation I'm working on. And to practice, letting myself feel, like just getting curious about, like, is there a giant, obscene, taboo pleasure here that I've been repressing? And can I just let myself just feel it for these 15 minutes? And some days, I set aside time to do it and I lay down and I can't find anything. I'm like, oh, this sucks. This is miserable. I had that experience for a long time when I was trying to apply existential kink to body image issues and health stuff and patterns of overeating and things like that. And I would try to feel the masochistic pleasure in it. And it was just, I couldn't. I was like, oh, this is so terrible. It's so destructive. I couldn't get beyond it. But I finally found a sadistic angle into it. I found that there's some part of me that loves imagining that my body is just imposing these intense sensations of disgust on other people. And if I can go in and just gleefully revel in the painful disgust that I'm causing, I don't know who, frat bros or something with my cellulite, then I just get so much pleasure. It's like volcanic bliss. So here's the thing. I think in accessing this pleasure, it helps to understand really that this is it's a totally universal human thing to take pleasure in messed up, frustrating, unpleasant circumstances. And that's been a big secret that has not been talked about at all, even though that was very well known in psychoanalytic circles, Freud, Jung, Lacan. And pretty much all what psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, a large part of what they started out as is getting people to gently, over years, through analyzing their dreams, recognize without being able to deny it, because their own dreams are telling them, hey, you're getting off on this thing. Because it's very difficult to just tell somebody that, because it's the ego immediately resists. Nobody's ego wants to hear this. And it's a very offensive idea. And I guess what I'm just saying is you can save yourself, decades of psychotherapy, and you can save yourself a whole lot of time if you're just willing to be offensively honest with yourself and embrace just a gross amount of love for everything that you create in your life. So anyways, as I was saying, it can take some time and some experimentation to find the right angle on any given issue. After I was finally able to feel my sadistic glee with my body image stuff, I became capable of having an honest desire to eat in a healthier way and to move my body a lot more, and my situation started to change. Because that's what happens, is when we make these unconscious desires conscious, there's this release of energy, and there's this change in our identity that occurs that is truly magic. It's actually, that's what magic is. And I could get into a whole historical discussion of that, but it's actually exactly what magicians in all cultures throughout the ages are, how they affect their changes is through this deep change in perception, change in identity, liberation of energy, solve coagula. And so once we have this, so when I finally succeeded in getting off on my my pleasure in being broke all the time in scarcity, very, very quickly, I became open to all of these awesome creative ideas about things that I could do to make money, things that I could do. And it wasn't that, gold bars started falling from the sky. It was just that finally my mind and my energies were freed from being, they've been previously absorbed in this kind of secret, compulsive, taboo pleasure in scarcity. And as long as they were absorbed in that secret compulsion, they weren't present in my mind to help me think of ways to make money and build a business and feel confident in that and feel good about that. So I'd liberate those energies, and then soon after I was making 10 times as much money per month, and then 20, and now I have a 7-figure business, which is mind-boggling to the part of me that used to wait in line at the food bank. But it's I've helped many people do similar transitions. And that's one of the reasons why I am so excited about existential kink, is because it is a very quick way of uniting the conscious and the unconscious wills. And it's a way that really hasn't been talked about a whole lot in popular culture previously. One way that I like to explain it is that it's a matter of humbling the conscious will to the unconscious will. Sort of like the conscious will is a knight, and the knight wants to go on all these quests and do all these cool things. But in order to be really, really powerful, the knight needs to be in union with the lady, the deep, receptive, feminine, generative part. And the unconscious is the generative, receptive part of us that creates our fate, creates our life. So when we, get down on our knees, when we humble ourselves, when we just are in total devotion and total praise to our fate as it already is, as to the pleasure and the fulfillment that we are already getting from it, and we're so surrendered and so humbled by it, then we enter into dialogue with our fate. We enter into a real relationship with the unconscious, which is what Jung was all about the ego having a relationship with the unconscious. because as we have that relationship, we're able to create, there's sort of like a fertilization that happens where the unconscious gets fertilized with the ideas of the conscious mind that previously were just sort of like these sterile ideas flapping around, going nowhere, all talk and no oomph. Suddenly, the conscious mind's ideas of what should happen when this deep surrender and this deep union happens, they are actually created. They actually gestate in the unconscious and they become born in our life as experiences, relationships, synchronicities. And that is the essence of magic. The ancient Norse talked about a witch or a sorcerer was somebody who was capable of dialoguing with their fate while still alive. So the Norse had this idea that your fate would appear to you as a person, usually a person of the opposite sex, in the hours right before you died, and they would appear to you and lead you into the underworld. And their idea was that, well, we have an explanation for why witches and sorcerers are able to do amazing things and healings. It's because they know how to talk to their fate, not just at the hour of their death, but they're already in dialogue with it. And that same sort of thing, this notion of the fate as not just the sum total of what happens in our lives, but also as, it gets personified as a spirit, as a person that we can have a relationship with. We see that in the work of Carl Jung when he's talking about the anima and the animus. Those are sort of very fateful figures analogous to what the Norse would call the fate or the fetch or the filja. And then likewise in the Western esoteric tradition, which I'm a part of, there's this idea of knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Which is this notion of, again, being in dialogue with, in relationship with this larger, expanded part of ourselves that we could also call the genius, or the Greeks called it the agathos daemon. Carl Jung called it the self with a capital S. So as we do this, and there's all sorts of means for expanding our relationship with this larger part of ourselves, existential kink is really great. Meditation is great. Dream work and dream interpretation, super awesome. Tarot divination, magical ritual and theogenic ritual, tantric sex ritual, all of it, fantastic. But it's all about broadening and deepening that channel of communication with the larger part of us, our inner teacher. And so that's what I understand true wealth to be, is a deep, broad, clear channel of communication back and forth between the conscious and the unconscious, or, we could say the living and the dead, or the living and the spirit world, or the underworld, or this, there's whole different ways of talking about it that all, I believe, essentially mean the same thing. So really having wealth, really having well-being, is a condition of being deeply responsive and deeply appreciative of exactly what our fate is. And through loving it, through humbly, surrenderingly, ecstatically loving it, what happens is we're able to influence it, just like we've been most influenced in our lives by the people who love us the most. When you know somebody doesn't like you, you don't really let them influence you. You're like, oh, well, screw them. I don't have to listen to them. But if somebody, loves you with all their heart and they suggest something to you, or they, whatever, you're more inclined to listen. Likewise with our fate, when we just love every dimension of it in a totally disgusting, gross, surrendered way, we achieve a relationship of influence with it, where we're able to have transformations, where we experience more what our conscious mind has been telling us that we always wanted to experience, but it seemed like we couldn't get there. We can get there when we humble ourselves with the unconscious.
Oh my goodness. I loved all of what you just said there. I'm just realizing oh my gosh, we're near the end of the show and there's questions I still have to ask you. I'm going to ask you, I've got two questions I want to ask you. It's like choosing between my two children. Which one's favorite? Okay, let me ask you. So Do you tend to find that once you've made contact with that kind of secret pleasure and kind of loved it into the light, does it always transmute into kind of this different relationship to it, in terms of, like you were describing, with your relationship with money, for example? It went from this kind of secret pleasure of not having any to then actually having all these ideas and creating an amazing business. Is there still a kind of part of that that remains that needs to be expressed in another way, if that makes sense? Like that pleasure of being devalued, does that still remain in a way, or is the entire thing transmuted?
Yeah. So fantastic question. So the transmutation can be quite dramatic and quite large. And I do find that there are still lingering pieces of it. So for me, one of the ways that this comes up, that I know that I still have a lingering attachment to feeling devalued, is every once in a while on social media, I'll get these comments, where people are talking about how I'm an evil demon, Satan worshiper, and they hate me and I should shut up and I'm evil. And there's some part of me that gets this like resonant little guilty twinge of like, oh no, they've caught me out. They've seen how evil I am. And now everybody knows. And, that like, and it's so sensational. It's so intense. And I'm, still in a process of like really fully working to receive that wholly. I've gotten better with it recently, where I can receive it and like feel like my face flushing and like feel like my heart pounding, and the sort of like fight or flight sensation that comes in when people start calling me evil. And and I'm like, oh wow, there's that part of me, the part of me that still like gets so much sensation and so much like fascination out of being devalued. There it is. And I don't know if I'm ever going to become so integrated that I will, never attract those sorts of experiences anymore, or I don't know. I mean, certainly I'm like, I have a whole lot of, these days in my life, tons of people value me very highly, which is beautiful. And I kind of like the spice of every few weeks, every now and again, getting some of this. And it's understandable. I mean, people don't like to be told to embrace everything in their experience when there's many, many hard and painful things in life. And there's trauma involved. And that could be a whole other giant discussion. But anyways, so yes, there can still be pieces of things that linger and still things that need to be worked out. And it becomes sort of like this spiraling process of like, okay, well, I've up-leveled in this way, but I can see there's still these things happening. And so, yeah, probably it's definitely a never-ending, lifelong journey until you somehow become completely enlightened and dissolve in a beautiful rainbow. But yeah.
Wonderful. I think I've got time. It links quite nicely for the other question I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that you still go through that process now and again, kind of trying to understand, like, what is the pleasure here? Do you tend to see that there could be, I don't know, unlimited places that you're finding every time there is a kind of, I don't want that, that's potentially another place that you're finding pleasure? Or do you find that they all link back to a small number of kind of core pleasure themes, if that makes sense, like maybe 1 to 3, and all those places they're showing up are actually relating back? Or could there be lots?
Yeah, I do think that so I guess both, because I think that, yeah, every opportunity, every experience of aversion, every experience of, oh, I don't like this shouldn't be happening, this is bad, this means that I'm bad, the world is bad. All of those experiences, I do think, are opportunities for exploration. And I do think that they do have some very common themes. So scarcity is a very common theme: scarcity of resources, scarcity of love, scarcity of worthiness. Being very similar to scarcity, maybe the same thing as scarcity, being not good enough or not lovable enough. Feeling, let's see, what else? Common themes. Oh, well, just, violence and death. Violence, death, violation. So an amazing trifecta right there. They're woven in to experience in this material world of duality that we have. There's tons of violence in nature. There's tons of violation in nature. There's tons of it in society. And of course, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And I hope for myself and everyone to be free of it. But it is happening. And so coming into a relationship with death, coming into a relationship with violence, coming into a relationship with violation and the facts of those and the facts of the pain and the reverberations that those generate, and being present with them in such a way that we're not endlessly just, clutching our pearls about them, but instead really having fearless, open hearts that are able to be present with ourselves and present with others going through those big experiences, and even being able to see the value in these experiences that we would ordinarily reflexively want to be like, well, that's evil. Like I've been touched by evil in my life. I experienced sexual abuse as a child, and I have no reservations with saying that's evil. I think that, I don't want anybody to have to experience it. It's evil. And it also, I found a way of being in relationship with it that it was so disorienting and so disintegrating that it compelled me to seek a larger context, a larger integration, a larger understanding of who I am and what the universe is, in order to be able to, function and be happy. And in that way, I can never escape from the fact that it was a massive, massive gift, a massive, massive awakening to me. So there's this deep paradox here of these like utterly evil things that, we would never wish for anyone, can also be these incredibly fertile sources of power and inspiration if they already happen to exist in our experience, and if we happen, if we become willing to be in a relationship with them, that we're sort of taking in the mystery and the gift in the pain. So I know that that's just sort of scratching the surface of a very, very deep topic there, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've definitely got lots of material for a part 2. I'm going to have to let you go. I really don't want to, because I really do feel like it feels as like we've left on a cliffhanger for sure. But this has been amazing. I feel like my mind is just kind of zipping all over the place, like wanting to ask you this and then this and this. So we'll close for now. But yes, that was absolutely glorious. So if listeners want to find out more about you and what you do and your book, which I'm certain they will, where's the best place to find you?
Totally. So I'll give the whole little download about that. So I have a website called carolyngraceelliott.com. And I think at carolyngraceelliott.com/free, they can join my email list and they'll get the 3 first chapters of my book, Existential Kink, for free. And also when you join my email list, it's really fun because I send emails every week that are pretty far out and interesting. Also, my book can be bought anywhere that books are sold. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores have it. It's called Existential Kink by me, Carolyn Elliott. I'm also on Instagram. So at Carolyn Elliott _ on Instagram, you can find me and hang out with me there. I do some private coaching, and the information about that is on my website under initial consultations. But most of what I do is I run a membership community called Wealth, which is an alchemical community where leaders and influencers come into their full power via the Hermetic arts. And there is an application process. It is exclusive. And currently we have about 800 members around the world who are all working with these sort of ideas that we've been talking about, with unifying the will, creating a deep relationship of influence with the larger self, with fate, the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. And we have just so much going on in wealth. We have live workshops. We have amazing social events where we practice being present in high sensation and really not hiding our power from the world. We have gift circles where we exchange gifts of services and products and all sorts of things. So we have this very tight-knit community that is going deep into exploration with alchemical, tarot, astrological, psychological principles to create lots of financial expansion and lots of true joy and true wealth. So I do highly invite everybody to come join me there. You can find out more about it on my Instagram and on my email list. My email list is probably the best way to get notified as soon as it opens, because it will only open for application for a week in September, and then it'll close again, and I'm not even sure when it will open after that. So yeah, that's sort of the download about finding me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This has been such a joy. I've absolutely loved this time together. Thank you.
Oh, likewise, Leanne. Thank you.
Wow. What a show. Isn't Carolyn amazing? These were my main takeaways. Carolyn sees money as a catalytic energy in the same way as entheogens and sex are. And just like those, it can be related to and harnessed from a strong integrated will or not. I loved what Carolyn said about how to uncover your unconscious desires. Simply take a look at your life. Finally, I could really feel the power of allowing your kinky pleasures to have the space to come into light and be loved, and therefore transmuted into other things in your life. If you'd like to get the notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, including Carolyn's book, which I highly recommend. When we recorded this, I hadn't read it. I now have and really do recommend it. Hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 293. And if you know in your heart you are ready to claim the clarity and courage from which you can make the hard choices to create a soul-led life overflowing with wild love, pleasure, expression, and purpose, and you're feeling called to awaken the wild heart, there are just a few spaces left now. We begin on Thursday, the 3rd of September. Go claim your place now at primalhappiness.co/WTWH. If you don't want to miss out next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, or your Android or iOS app of choice. Hit that subscribe button, and you will get each gorgeous episode straight to your ears as soon as it's come out. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next Tuesday.